I'm Alana, and my pronouns are they and them.
And I'm Jessie. My pronouns are she and her. And we're making menches. Making Menches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
We're back after a very long hiatus. We've been trying to figure out the best way to continue being in community during a genocide. And we're focusing our attention on Palestine and on our ritual events, Haggadah, and workshops for a while instead. We're excited to bring back the podcast while continuing to center Palestine with this platform. We're very enthused to share our first 2 episodes after this pause.
In the spring of 2022, after I was fired for being an anti-Zionist and subsequently sued the synagogue that fired me, we received an outpouring of support and outreach that far overshadowed the hateful interactions.
One of these people who reached out was Dr. Bill. Bill emailed us and told us about himself and expressed that he had a whole collection of old anti-Zionist literature that informed his own anti-Zionist journey decades ago. One Sunday, we went to his house for lunch and talked, and he gave us some of these books.
After sharing some of the texts with our community online and seeing people resonate with them, Bill decided he wanted to share his own journey. He wrote down his story for us, which is published on our blog, which can be found on our website. And we wanted to talk with him in person to fill in any gaps and bring his story to more mentions. We are super grateful to him for spending time with us. He'd love to answer any questions, so please send them our way after listening. This is part 1.
Today, we are joined by our wonderful friend, Dr. Bill. I am recommending that anyone who's listening go to makingmenches.com on our blog and read all of the parts of Dr. Bill's personal journey to truth story, which details his personal journey as an anti-Zionist Jew. We're here today with Dr. Bill. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
And we're going to delve into some more questions related to the story that is on our blog. So pause this and read that if you haven't yet. We'll jump right into it.
So we're so grateful that you contributed your story in written format. And early in your story, you talk about the various places you encountered Zionism in your Jewish upbringing. And we're curious, what's your earliest memory of Zionism in the classroom?
Okay, well, obviously it wasn't in public school. That was not discussed in public grade schools, which is what I attended where I grew up. And so I would say my first encounter with that was in the afternoon Hebrew school. I attended a Young Israel synagogue Hebrew school, which was a modern Orthodox part of the Orthodox movement. And I remember hearing about that, given introductions to that by our Hebrew school teacher as part of its history lesson. What I do remember is a primer where there were, a lot of illustrations, which is in line with what you would expect to show a grade school child. And I do remember that the Arabs were always depicted either riding camels or living in tents, which was basically Bedouin Arabs, but certainly not urban Arabs or Arabs that had lived in cities for the longest time or were members of the learned professions. We were never told that Arabs were anything other than people riding camels or living in tents.
Yeah.
And we believed it because we had no other frame of reference. And I think that didn't realize it at the time, but obviously there was a lot of Zionist influence promoting these books to the synagogues of the era. I guess they were probably given a good price on them. And at even early then, the mid-50s, late 50s, they were promoting a certain idea of what Israel was to young American Jews. And we didn't dispute it. Then there was also the thing we went around, we were given at the Hebrew school, the little blue tin boxes, which, what are they called again?
The DACA boxes.
No, they were called something else. Pinto boxes?
It's
Pishkas.
Oh,
Yeah.
I heard that before.
That's Yiddish.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were basically encouraged to go around to our neighbors. And obviously, where I lived was a large apartment building. So we would, go from door to door and ask for neighbors to put some spare change in the boxes. And the purpose of the boxes, which I didn't know who the boxes were. I mean, now I know it was the Jewish National Fund, but as a kid, you don't know. The Hebrew school gave it to you, so and he gave it back to the Hebrew school. And it was money to raise money to plant trees in Israel. Because, quote unquote, we, being the Jews, made the desert bloom. And we believed that also. But learning many, many years later is nobody makes the desert bloom. The desert is still the desert. There are some areas that have arable land that may need more forestation, but the desert didn't bloom. It was just a phrase to think that Jews performed a miracle when they got to Israel.
Right.
And what we also learned many years later was that these trees were planted on the destroyed pre-existing Palestinian villages in many instances, which is another thing that you learn when you're older, that you realize you've been deceived and lied to about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And as a more mature young adult, you resent being lied to, which is a natural response.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so interesting that even though we were growing up at different times, of course, we have a large age gap, that so much of that, I would call it propaganda, remains the same. Like, I feel like Jesse and I in our Hebrew school experienced kind of the same exact thing.
And I was honestly, obviously I've been out of that loop, and I'm amazed to learn that it's still the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had mitzvah mall cards. I remember them so vividly. Instead of going out and collecting, was it pishkas?
Pishkas.
We would buy the cards and give them to people as like holiday cards. Like, oh, you donated this card as a donation in honor of planting a tree in Israel or something, and I remember that.
Now, both of my sons attended the afternoon Hebrew school up until their bar mitzvahs. And I honestly don't recall any of that going on in their Hebrew school. That didn't go on. I did not pay much attention to their time in Hebrew school. My wife did, because she was on the committee to head the education committee there, but I really wasn't aware of what went on with them in it.
Yeah.
In it.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was similar. I feel like that's such a consistent experience. I mean, synagogues are absolutely doing that now. We see now so many temples have made it their mission to raise money for Israel, for the IDF.
That I was aware of.
Yeah.
Because I was on the board of trustees for a little while, and I was head of the men's club and things like that. And they would always have annual or semi-annual fundraisers, and then everybody's name would go on the fundraising list. Actually, one time, I was upset because I think it was the Jewish National Fund or something they were raising money for. And I had my name placed on whatever the bulletin was as a sponsor. And I was like, I didn't sponsor anything. And it wasn't a matter of not wanting to be on the sponsorship of it, which I obviously, but I actually would not have wanted to anyway. But it was, you put my name on this thing without my permission.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? And the answer was, well, we always do that. He says, what, do you object? I said, yes.
Right.
I said,
What was that conversation like?
It was like, what kind of a schmuck are you? You can't use my name without my permission.
Yeah.
But I didn't make waves, okay? Because quite honestly, we became members of the synagogue for social reasons, partly for professional reasons, and we wanted the boys to learn about their heritage.
Yeah.
And they both became bar mitzvah. The oldest one became confirmed. The younger one, that's a whole different story why he didn't become confirmed, but I won't bother you with that one. We'll play you that off record. The rebel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why most people join temples in the United States, is for the social element, the community, the culture.
Every religious institution,
Right.
be it a synagogue or a church or a mosque, it doesn't, people join for social.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how many true believers there are.
I mean, this is a tangent that we won't go into, but I think a massive part of religion is the community, like less so even than the actual like spirituality or faith. And that's why it's so difficult for people to make waves in it, because that is where your community is.
And if you make waves, you're ostracized.
Yeah, and you lose your whole community, which is another way that.
And you have to not care if you lose your whole community.
Yeah.
Sometimes to be true to yourself.
Yeah. This is sort of a sharp pivot.
Okay.
Farther into your story, I think. But we're wondering if you can describe your experience speaking to Alfred Lilienthal in 1978. We know it was a short phone call, but how did it feel to get in touch with the person who changed your worldview so much?
Oh, well, I was, fairly young at the time. I was in my late 20s. And the reason I got in contact with Lilienthal was because the publisher asked me if I would like to after I finished reading his book, which was the title of The Zionist Connection. And what was 1974, as I recall? What's the year of the book?
Of the book? Let me see. The Zionist Connection. 1978.
78. So I'm 30-ish. I'm 30-ish. Like the show. And I had read this book, and I obviously, as I say on the blog, I was, just amazed at what I learned. And I was amazed that I had such a hard time obtaining the book after it was reviewed in the New York Times. And so I called the publisher to let them know the trouble I was having. And they thanked me very much and said, why don't you tell the author? I said, I can? I said, sure, here's his phone number. So I called him. And it's just, I always remember the conversation. It was very brief, but here I am, 30-ish. And Alfred Lilienthal says to me, thanks, kid. I knew that was going to happen. And, it was like, wow. And it's the first time, I ever actually spoke to anybody that wrote any book. So, it was like, this is cool.
Yeah.
I didn't think that, I said, does that make a difference that I told the author? Is he going to follow up on that? I guess he will. But the thing that he did that was really key, he asked me, where I was located. And I said, I'm in the New York area. And he was in Washington, D.C. And So he told me there was someone he wanted me to get in touch with, which was that Rabbi Elmer Berger, who was the principal individual behind the American Council for Judaism. And so I got in touch with Rabbi Berger, which led me further into finding out what was really going on.
So Alfred Lilienthal gets a bad rep as an anti-Semite, as do many anti-Zionist Jews. However, he made a decision to sign a petition alongside Noam Chomsky and many other academics in the defense of a Holocaust denier who was an author in France for his right to free speech in the late 70s or early 80s. Do you have any thoughts about Lilienthal's decision to sign the petition or academic freedom more broadly?
Yeah, I think you can be for academic freedom, but you have to parse it with defending something that's indefensible. And being a Holocaust denier is indefensible. So at the time, he was being attacked for his academic freedom. Lilienthal and Chomsky was used to it always. So they were wrong. You know, you can be a brilliant historian and a very deep thinker, and you can make mistakes. And you should not defend a Holocaust denier ever. So they made a mistake.
Yeah.
They're entitled to make a mistake. They human.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think that's something that often gets weaponized against radical people or leftists, anti-Zionists especially. It's like, if you've ever done anything wrong or anything that is out of line with your morals or values, it's automatically used to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Denigrate?
Yes, to...
Well, that's how politics in this country works all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure it works that way in other countries too, but I'm more focused on how it works here.
Yeah.
And in every political campaign, there's an opposition research group that's attached to the candidates.
Yeah.
And all they look for is to dig up some kind of dirt against their opponent. And it could be innocent, it could be very small, and it could just be to attack them to defeat their position. The one that I think of most now is the one that just was done against Fani Willis, the one that's prosecuting Donald Trump in Georgia. And, you know, they tried to get her off the case because her boyfriend was assigned to the case, and they tried to make her relationship with that other prosecutor look like it was some kind of sleaze. It was totally out of line, but, you know, look who tried to do it, Trump.
Of course. Yeah. The king of that exact tactic.
I do think that's a particularly potent accusation when Zionists levy it at anti-Zionists. Like, you are a Holocaust denier, shuts down the conversation, or you're associated with a Holocaust denier.
Well, it can shut down the conversation because then your legitimate voice, and what is attempted to do is to squelch your legitimate voice, and it's successful doing that.
Right. Right. Yeah. In your conversation with Rabbi Berger, he advised you not to share your anti-Zionist opinion publicly.
Correct.
How did it feel to carry your anti-Zionism essentially alone for so long, and then only in secret on the internet? Do you feel any regret over not remaining more vocal?
No, I don't have any regret about not remaining more vocal because I had my practice, my profession to worry about, and I've seen other anti-Zionist Jews who came out against it lose their jobs because they were vocal. Like, the most notable one is Norman Finkelstein, who wound up going to several different universities after he was fired by one after another, after he had published certain books. I certainly wasn't as knowledgeable as Norman Finkelstein, I mean, I read his books, but I wasn't going to go public with that. And the thing that comes first is your livelihood and your family.
Yeah.
Well, there was no point in going public with it. I mean, I would have individual conversations with certain people who were amenable to listening. But you have to have a sense of who you're talking to first.
Yeah.
And, they may not be knowledgeable about the subject, but you get a sense of they're intuitively feeling that something isn't right that's going on. So then you can engage them in a conversation.
Yeah.
But, I mean, later on in life, I mean, we had a couple of dear old friends over for dinner one night, and he was in the same profession as I am, and we're both subsequently retired. But he is his wife is a 2G-er, which, if the people don't know the telecast, is a child of a Holocaust survivor. And they carry a lot of psychological baggage with them. And it's completely understandable because they've been told by their parents what they suffered through at the hands of the Nazis. And so 2Gers tend to be, I don't like to say the knee jerk, but they tend to be very defensive of the state of Israel. And I understand that. But this friend of mine, we were having a discussion about it over dinner, and he was saying that they're going to throw us into the sea. And I'm like, okay, I know that phrase. And I was like, nobody's going to throw you into the sea. Okay, it isn't happening, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. And that fear blocks a lot of abilities to make justice happen.
Yeah, that speaking to that fear and that inherited trauma, one of the questions we get asked most often for supporting other people on is talking about Zionism with friends, family, people that are closest to them in their lives. And we're curious, because you've been doing it for a while now, how do you navigate differing feelings on Zionism within your family?
Or loved ones in general, like friends, family, community.
Well, with the immediate family, we just do not discuss it to maintain peace in the house. So there's a nice Hebrew phrase, peace in the home. What is it? And we just don't. The immediate family, I know how both of my sons feel. They both have opposite views. I don't know if they discuss it with each other. I'm sure they don't, because they're not into the politics and the history of it, as much as maybe I would want them to be. But when I both wanted them to be champion swimmers, and neither one became a champion swimmer. So, they're adults now. They discuss what they like among themselves, but I don't do that. It isn't worth it.
Yeah. I think that's what a lot of anti-Zionist Jews end up feeling.
If someone brings it up to me, I'll give my opinion, but I won't just foist it on somebody.
Yeah. I think a lot of anti-Zionist Jews, even especially today, this has become such a hot button topic for like young anti-Zionist Jews. Like, how do I maintain my relationships with my family, with my community? Can I maintain those relationships?
Well, you probably can't.
Yeah.
Okay. It's almost like 30 years ago. I'll do something you'll understand. If you come out as anti-Zionist to your family and they're all very strongly Zionist, you'll be exiled or disinherited.
Yeah.
If you come out to your family, if you came to your family 30, 40 years ago that you were gay.
Yeah.
That's why so many gays stayed in the closet.
Yeah.
You couldn't. You'd be disinherited.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's improved since then.
Oh, well, for some, not for all.
For some, not for all. That's very true.
Yeah. But that is the truth of anti-Zionism right now. Yeah, I mean, everyone makes their own decisions based on what their own personal dynamic is. Like, I don't talk about it with my grandmother because she's older,
And why get
and
upset?
yeah, we have
What's the
disagreed on a lot of things in this life.
point?
Exactly. But I have a different way of dealing with it with my parents because I want to challenge them more. And so it
Can't
really
they
is up
deal with
to,
it dispassionately as an academic exercise? If they can't, then don't do it.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's yeah. Everyone makes those decisions based on their own dynamics, and I think that that's important for anti-Zionist Jews to talk about, and like talk about how that feels and what those conversations are
You
like.
know, if you have a symposium and there's 5 anti-Zionist Jews on one side of the table and 5 pro-Zionist Jews on the other side of the table, and you're having a symposium, that's an academic exercise. I mean, you may wind up having a fist fight, who knows? But
At this point.
but you shouldn't do that with family unless you really know your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're right too about the almost coming out of the closet perspective as well with risk and safety. You know, not everyone feels safe enough to express themselves to their families in a lot of capacities. So if you don't feel safe, don't take it up at the dinner table, you know. And if you do feel safe, it's navigating that terrain of what words do we use, what terminology, what do we agree on, how do we talk down, you know, big feelings. So I think it's really helpful to hear that you have been navigating that and trying out the waters, hearing what other people are asking you, feeling when it's okay to disclose little parts of your beliefs, because that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're surprised. I was having like a casual discussion with my older first cousin. He's a few years older than me, and I was quite surprised when he has the same attitude that I do. He may not be up on the history as much, but his attitude is the same, which I got from what he said to me.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're just hesitant to bring it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know I was hesitant to know what my cousins thought, who are close in age to me, and was also really happy to find out that we agreed, and we've since had them on the podcast to talk, which was really awesome. Good. But yeah, it's nice when people surprise you.
It might be easier with contemporaries than with people that are senior to you because their historical experience is different.
Yeah.
Especially older grandparents, which there aren't too many left now, who experienced the Holocaust, and experienced World War II. And to you, it's history.
Right.
You know, you're born after 1945, and you're still, you know, you're 79 years old. You're born after 1945, but it's still history because you didn't live through it.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
And if you discuss this with them as a young person, say in the 1960s, they'd get totally upset. First of all, they got upset because he had long hair. Then they got upset because of the music you listened to.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's just, you don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't know when you're 20 years old, but you shouldn't do that because you're young and headstrong and everything is true or false.
Yeah.
But don't do that to your elders. They're really nice people. And most of them are.
Yeah.
And they get upset.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very hard. I think that is the common response, is like, which is accurate, that we have different life experiences and that we don't understand, which is true. We don't understand the experience of growing up in such close proximity, even though we still are in close proximity to the Holocaust. It's still distance.
You don't remember growing up in the 60s when the Vietnam War was on.
Yeah.
I don't remember growing up in the 60s because I was there.
I think a common trope, especially recently, is around Zionism, is that anti-Semitism is so bad, and that is why we need the state of Israel. Do you think that anti-Semitism is worse now than it has been in America previously?
No, not even close. Okay, not even close. The anti-Semitism was rampant in the 1910s and 20s and 30s. Your listeners may not remember many names for the top one. Look it up. Coughlin, and Henry Ford, who promoted the Jew-hating articles of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was the Jew-hating forge. Luckily, you notice I don't use the term anti-Semitic. I try to stay away from that term because, as I mentioned in the blog, it was actually a euphemistic term for polite people of the 19th century. Being an anti-Semite was nicer than saying I hate Jews.
Yeah. Yeah. And in your blog, just for folks who want to look into that, Dr. Bill does talk about like a little bit more in depth why anti-Semitism doesn't feel accurate to what people are actually doing or espousing.
Okay. So there's lots of groups organizing right now around Palestinian liberation. Which are some of these groups or individuals that you feel are organizing really well right now, if any?
Well, the one I've been following online and subscribing to their email releases is the JVP, the Jewish Voice for Peace. And I think they're doing a pretty good job at organizing. They seem to be quite active with what's going on now. I don't go to any of their protest rallies or anything like that, mostly because I'm physically unable to start doing those kind of things. If I was 40 years ago, I'd probably be at most of them, but I just don't do that anymore. But I support them with a little, financial contribution and thing like that. But I think they're on the right track. I hope they are.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a bunch of Palestinian organizations, but I think we're more concerned with Jewish organizations, aren't we, for this?
Well, we love supporting Palestinian organizations.
CARE does a good job.
Yeah, CARE is great.
CAIR.
Yeah, we love CARE. Yeah, there are so many that have popped up in the last 5 years, 10 years that do really amazing work. Obviously, you spent a very long time seeing anti-Zionism on the fringes. How has it made you feel to see anti-Zionism enter the mainstream in the way it has over the last few years?
Okay, well, I'm encouraged because I think, unfortunately, the state of Israel has been getting away with a lot of damaging and bad policies for the last 50 years. That's 50 years. And they've been encouraged to do so by the United States' lack of putting some brakes on them. And clearly, many of the things they've been doing towards the Palestinians is a violation of international law. And a couple of US presidents over the last 50 years have tried to put some brakes on, but it's inevitably been a failure. And now I like to say that Zionism has now reached its absurd conclusion, especially with what the right-wing Zionist government now is doing to the Palestinians. Obviously, the big headlines are what's going on in Gaza, but they're also doing it on the West Bank as well. And the US press hasn't been reporting as much of what's been going on in Gaza on the West Bank as obviously what's been going on in Gaza, which is, by anyone's definition, a genocide. And I'll probably get knocked down for using the word genocide. And
our listeners would agree.
It is. I mean, it's not the Nazi Holocaust in scope, but it comes under the definition of a genocide. And I like the fact that young Jews especially are recognizing the injustice. And I think they recognize this injustice based on the fact that they're Americans and certain American ideas of what's right and wrong are contrary to Israeli ideas of what is right and wrong. And there is this disconnect with the state of Israel because they're not acting the way a democracy should be acting.
Yeah.
Although, well, neither democracy is an ideal democracy, but in the United States, we don't bomb cities that are within our borders.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really grateful for your perspective and everything that you've shared with us on this episode. We will definitely have to come back and do another episode.
Certainly.
As you've mentioned, the young people taking up this cause now, I'm curious what lessons or lesson, if you want to give one big lesson, that you want to pass on to the next generation of anti-Zionist activists.
Okay. Lesson is, if you think something you're doing is right, and you think your viewpoint is right, don't give up that viewpoint until you've changed your own mind if you've learned new information. And be very careful about who you come in contact with your point of view, because you could be coming in contact with someone who doesn't like Jews per se, just because you're a Jew. And that person is commonly called an anti-Semite, more accurately as a Jew hater. And if you come in contact with someone like that, lose them. Because if you associate with them, it's going to delegitimize yourself.
Thank you. I think those are important lessons, timeless lessons. We just want to thank you again for talking to us. And I just think it's so important that your voice is heard. I think a lot of young anti-Zionist Jews either don't know or don't feel confident that there are people who have always been anti-Zionist Jews. And that's why it's so important.
Can I address that?
Please.
Okay. I gave you this encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Palestine, and there's one section, I believe it's in volume 2, and there's an enormous list. It's about 2 or 3 pages long in very small font of all of the American and British Jews who were prominent at the turn of the 20th century, who were responding to Herzl.
Oh.
To Theodore Herzl's and the Zionist congresses at the time. And these were very, very prominent people. I'm talking senators and congressmen and judges and doctors and lawyers. Okay, and you really should look at that list and see who's on it. It's an incredible list. And then I'm sure you all know about the Balfour Declaration. And there was one cabinet member on the British cabinet who was completely against the Balfour Declaration. And Lilienthal goes into that in his chapter on the Balfour Declaration. And he was the only Jew in the cabinet. And he was very prescient in foreseeing what would happen if it was passed, and His Majesty's government viewed with favor the creation of the Jewish colony in Palestine. And he was right. Everything he foresaw has come to pass.
Yeah. And so it goes with history.
Yep.
Well, we definitely hope to have more conversations in the future. Thanks everyone for listening, and stay tuned for more. You can always find us at our website, makingbenches.com. Sign up for our newsletter for updates, which Jesse needs to do, or on our Instagram where we update more daily. Thanks for listening to Making Menches. As an explicitly anti-Zionist grassroots org, we don't receive any institutional funding or support. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmenches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Menches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Menches, the podcast, is produced by Alana Lipkin and Jesse Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jesse Sander.